Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back with another episode of the award-winning podcast, and I'm pleased to welcome back Vince Walden. Vince, welcome back.
Yeah, Tom, thank you for having me on the show. This has been an exciting week for compliance professionals.
And why don't you tell the audience why it was such an
Oh,
exciting week and where you were?
yeah, I was at many of us were at the SCCE, the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics Annual Summit in Grapevine, Texas. And on that Monday opening keynote, Assistant Attorney General Nicole Argentieri gave a gave her speech online, but dialed in. But at the same time, they released the amendments to the evaluation of corporate compliance programs. So now the latest version is as of September 2024, not 2023. So as many of you could see, there's a lot of social media buzz on all this new interest in the updated version.
It seemed to be exactly as you said, a lot of buzz, a lot of people at the conference talking about it on social media. Myself, Matt Kelly, and others blogged about it.
Yeah.
Ethisphere did a live podcast on it. But now that you've been able to get home and we've had some chance to reflect, I really wanted to take the opportunity, Vince, to maybe take a little bit deeper dive with you. She referenced it in her talk. And then, of course, as you said, the 2024 update was released. And she emphasized, she being Nicole Argentieri, the DOJ's focus on data access. And I will quote from the 2024 update that says, do compliance and control personnel have sufficient direct or indirect access to relevant sources of data to allow for timely and effective monitoring, testing of policies, controls, and transactions? And I want to set this up, Vince, with you and I are both have very different professional backgrounds. And so in many ways, I've seen you educate lawyers like myself about data, but now the DOJ is saying, Mr. Lawyer, who happens to be the CCO, do you have access to that data? And what do you think that means for fraud risk management, compliance risk management, and the data analytics that you and Kona bring to the table?
Yeah. What I've seen a lot of companies doing, and that when they think that they're doing analytics, they're doing analytics on internally generated compliance data. And I really don't, in my view, and again, as someone who's passionate and has spent their career doing forensic data analytics around fraud prevention, corruption, sanctions, et cetera, doing analytics on your survey statistics and who's gone through training, maybe on how many due diligence checks you've done, even how many hotline statistics, all that is internally generated compliance statistics. Very good stuff. It's very important to do that. I mean, don't stop doing those. But that's not what the DOJ is referring to, I believe, when they think about data analytics. It's in the business. Where does fraud happen? Fraud doesn't happen in the due diligence check. Fraud doesn't happen in a survey, or fraud happens when you're actually doing business with third parties. Money is being transacted. And now you can get all sorts of risk indicators from the compliance data driven data. But what the DOJ is specifically referring to is access to, I would say, non-compliance data, which is the payments, the invoices, the purchase orders, or the sales information, the things around transactions that involve customers, vendors, and employees. And that's really where it gets to the heart of information. And the challenges that we see is that typically those data sources have been owned by IT or SA or the finance group, or internal audit often has access to such transactional and financial type data. And compliance professionals haven't really been invited to the party when those systems have been looked at. But it's clear that DOJ is expecting compliance to be involved in the ERP systems. It specifically calls out ERP systems during an M&A acquisition. And if, like, for compliance professionals, if you don't know what ERP is, or what an enterprise resource planning system is, and more importantly, what your system uses, whether it's SAP or Oracle, then you're behind the ball. So that access, I think, is really beyond compliance data, as I think the general theme.
Vince, I've even heard one suggestion that someone should train compliance officers on where to look for data. Do you think that's something that's warranted based upon this shift in DOJ thinking?
Oh, I think that's a great idea. That's a great opportunity for a class. Look, it's funny. I always make this comment that many compliance professionals who have law backgrounds, you didn't go to law school because you loved math. You went to law school because you loved language, right? And you're comfortable with text and due diligence reports and documents, etc. The accountants did the math stuff and the accounting. But it is so clear that an effective compliance program that is data driven considers both the laws and regulations in the documents, the unstructured data, but also the structured data. Because remember, you can't pay a bribe through email. You can talk about it, but you have to pay it with money, and money gets booked in a transaction. And so when you think about encompassing the scope of an effective compliance program, you need to have some transparency into your business operations around who's getting paid, where's money coming in from, and the employee's activity. You don't have to be an accountant. You don't have to be a CPA, but you should have an understanding of how these systems work. And there's now analytics and models that can map the traditional tests and risk algorithms that compliance professionals need in pulling in that data. That's what we have built out specifically at Kona AI. We built this for compliance professionals. Internal audit also uses it because they have a fraud risk lens, but we've made it easy for compliance professionals to have that transparency into the business to understand who is my top 10 riskiest vendors getting paid, not just risky vendors from a due diligence perspective, but who's actually getting paid and whose transactions look suspect, because that's where the DOJ is going to look.
Vince, it's not simply understanding where that data might be or having access to it. It's not simply being able to utilize that data. It is actually leveraging that data. And I'm going to
Right.
read once again from the 2024 update, and it puts the question as succinctly as possible. Is the company appropriately leveraging data analytics tools to create efficiencies in compliance operations and measure the effectiveness of compliance programs? First of all, what does that mean for the compliance professional? But do you see a way to leverage AI and even LLM to maybe help the compliance professional with these large amounts of data?
Yeah. First off, the starting with your internal data, compliance data is a great start, as I mentioned, but I don't think, as I mentioned previously, it's not enough. It's not the expectation of a robust or sophisticated compliance program that matches in proportionality to the sophistication of the business, which we can talk about later, but that was also a consideration in the new guidance. When you think about the access to data, compliance professionals need to sit back and ask, especially as they think about their 2025 goals, who am I going to work with in the business beyond just my compliance team and my internally generated compliance data? Who are custodians of the business where I have risks? Now, depending on your risk, it's business to business has different risks. Sometimes the risks are with sales and distributors. Sometimes the risks are with vendors and payables and people that you pay money to. And by taking that risk-based approach, I often advise my Kona AI software customers when they get started, don't try to boil the ocean. You don't need to pull in every ERP system. Again, most companies have 3, 5, 10 different ERP accounting systems around the world. And it's cost prohibitive, and it's really not necessary to go and try to gather all those company databases all at once. You take a risk-based approach. We have high risks in this business unit for this, whether it's bribery and corruption or human trafficking or what have you, or forced labor, and identify where the risks are and then map your data to those risks. When I make a presentation, I always say data analytics does not start with data. And that sounds counterintuitive. Data analytics, and I'll repeat it, data analytics does not start with data. Data analytics starts with your risk assessment. Because if you do data analytics on something that doesn't matter, or that's a low risk or not relevant, or it doesn't matter to the general counsel or to the CFO or to the business, then why bother? And the DOJ doesn't care either. It's risk-based approach, which means you don't have to have the entire organization indexed. You just have to have a risk-based approach. I know I get long and I get on my soapbox on that, Tom, but that's so important.
Vince, it's even a step beyond leveraging data analytics because the DOJ has really, in my mind, moved to real-time monitoring. And once
Yes.
again, I know that's something you have talked about for a long time. At one point, you were pretty much a lone voice in the wind talking about that. But I think maybe a lot of people have come around to your way of thinking. But how can a compliance program move from a detect mode to a truly preventative mode through real-time data monitoring, either in fraud risk or compliance risk?
Yeah. Think continuous controls monitoring. And again, internal audit folks love this word, and even finance people love this word, continuous controls monitoring. We can set up rules. In fact, over the, we processed over $300 billion of third party disbursements. And amongst our customers, we look and see what's hitting most. And when, for example, a payment to a third party has no purchase order, it's a round dollar indicative of cash, hits on certain keyword terms, it's urgent, it was paid before it was even invoiced, or was it paid before the payment terms were due, and oftentimes it was duplicative. When those five things happen in combination, that's typically a high risk payment or a bribe. They're one of our passions, and what we've built out are all these risk scenarios. We call them risk signals. So it's not about just having hundreds of tests. It's about running those hundreds of tests and seeing which combinations result in a risk indicator. And that is how compliance professionals can be far more efficient in their risk assessments and in their proactive monitoring, even stopping an improper payment before it gets paid. And when you think about the ACFE report to the nation study that the average corruption scheme costs a company $200,000 per incident. That's not the cost to investigate. That's just the loss in the bribes being paid. It can add up real quick. And certainly historically, DOJ, I saw this report from Stanford University's FCPA website that they said over the years, they looked at the average cost of investigating an FCPA matter is $1.5 million a month. That's the
Hmm.
investigation cost for a DOJ matter, when you have to pay your attorneys, your forensic accountants, et cetera. That's the reactive mode. That's expensive. And gosh, for less than 200,000 a year, and even sometimes even less, far less than that, you can have continuous controls monitoring around your vendors, customers, and employees continuously rolling. So saying it's too expensive when you're a billion-dollar company.
Vince, the DOJ also moved in a direction of saying compliance officers need to utilize data analytics to assess the overall effectiveness of their compliance program. When you have discussions with clients or potential clients, do you talk to them about that and perhaps setting up KPIs or in some way measuring the effectiveness of their program?
Yeah, that is it. I have two ways to describe what we do when it comes to data analytics and what to look for. There's make the business better and keep you out of trouble. And of course, the compliance argument and the DOJ argument and this guidance is the scare tactic of keep you out of trouble. You don't want to face the DOJ without a data-driven compliance program. But think about it put yourself in the CFO's shoes for a second. You're analyzing spend data for fraud, risk, and compliance that's going to save the company money. So make the business better. And typically with my customers, I mean, I put goals together. I would like to see 5 times return on investment, if not more. So this will these types of initiatives help the business save money, not just keep it out of trouble. And so when you're doing it, many of our customers, I've got one customer that saves over $300 million in a year. They're a very large company that processes billions and billions of dollars of payments, but there's some really good ROI statistics on that. So DOJ went so far even as to get into the machine learning world a little bit in the guidance. And it said, I'm going to read specifically on page 13 where it talks about data resources and access. How is the company's managing the quality of its data, which of course is key, and how is the company measuring the accuracy, precision, or recall of any data analytics models it's using? Which means, hey, they're saying predictive modeling. Now, when I hear the words precision and recall, that is what in data science terms, that's called an F1 score. And in Kona AI, for example, every one of our customers has their machine learning model. As they review and they tag high risk transactions, they're training their model. And that F1 score, which ranges anywhere between 0 and 1, it's a percentage, improves over time. Most of them start out at 60% accuracy. And as they tag more transaction, the machine learns, gets up to 70, 80. I've had as high as 86% accurate. And to be able to show improvement of here's our predictive model. It started out at 60, but we tagged it. We review these transactions, not thousands of transactions, but like the top 20 transactions every month from a particular business unit or region, for example. Showing that model improvement over time is a fantastic example of specifically precision and recall like the DOJ has that I don't think very many companies are, other than our customers, that are privy to. So those are the types of things to start thinking about, let alone not just the machine learning, but the dollar savings. I would very much encourage compliance professionals to keep track of the cost savings that they have and agree with the CFO, have a meeting with the CFO and agree on what are the metrics that the CFO is going to sign off on, cost savings or recoveries. So that at the end of the year, compliance can not only say, look, we demonstrated an effective compliance program and where we can meet DOJ's expectations, but also we save the company 15, 20, $30 million or more.
And that really, I think, speaks to another area in the 2024 update, which is entitled Proportionate Resource Allocation.
Oh,
And the
yeah.
question is, how do these assets, resources, and technology available to compliance and risk management compare to those available elsewhere in the company? I don't think the question the compliance officer should be asking, I think they should be asking what you've said, Vince, which is, what is my cost savings? And so how do I demonstrate to the CFO the value in this and how that it's made the company run more efficiently? And that's the eternal ROI that's going to garner me more resources. Is that something that compliance officers can do as well?
Proportional that this, I was really happy to see that proportionality comment in there. I know Matt Galvin, when he gives his speeches at conferences, he talks about this a lot. So I'm not surprised that it's in there. Specifically, if you are a global electronics or technology company with over, 5, 10, 20, $50 billion in sales, and you're global and your marketing department, your manufacturing department, everybody's using AI, everybody's using leading technologies, and you're a compliance department that still is just doing due diligence checks and using your own compliance internally generated data with no type of AI or machine learning, that is clearly disproportionate to the sophistication of your company. On the flip side, if you're a farmer or your agriculture company and your business is very linear and straightforward and your sales are domestic, then maybe you don't need the machine learning and the sophisticated model because that's not as sophisticated. You still use technology. There's some great things going on with autonomous tractors and things, but it's really that proportionality is key. To make the case to the CFO, Tom, you're right. You got to show numbers and return on investment, which we can help you do. Analytics can help you do. But the DOJ is saying, look, how can you say that you don't have the resources or the budget when you're a multi-billion-dollar global company producing XYZ leading technologies for the world, and your compliance department is still paper-based or just doing Power BI dashboards on a few survey statistics? That's not going to fly.
I think in many ways, the DOJ caught up to things you've been talking about for some time. I felt like they finally caught up to me in one area, and that is document.
Yes.
They specifically said that around AI, which I hope we can have a later show on that. But Vince, I read that to be documentation and transparency around compliance teams creating audit trails for data access and decision making. Is that something that you and your team can help companies with the document and
Yes.
transparency part?
Yeah. What's funny, I was just having a conversation with the chief compliance officer of a global manufacturing company who said, Vince, it's great when you have a company that has one ERP system, but we've got 30 ERP systems. We don't even know where to start. And I'm like, look, you can't, that's not an excuse for you not to do anything. I go, the key is do your risk assessment. If you have a process is better than doing nothing. And if you can document, we did our risk assessment. Like I said, don't start with analytics, start with your risk assessment. If you have a risk, do your risk assessment and say, look, we found this, we have a risk here in this country, in this business unit. All right. Then you map to, all right, where does the vendors and the customer data lie and what ERP system in that country? And you just pull a sample of that. That's not a huge ask. That can be done relatively quick and relatively inexpensively. I mean, typically for less than 50 grand, you could do these types of things. Again, this is for $1 billion company. And to get that kind of leverage, being able to show ROI on that risk and be able to identify policy circumventions or bribes, kickbacks, or what have you. Again, when you look at a billions of dollars of transactions, you're not always going to find massive bribery and corruption. I hope you don't. Usually, and again, in my experiences, you don't. But you do find policy circumventions. You see errors. You see areas for improvement that you can take back to the business and make it run better, saving the company money. And then, like, well, let's think, it's not a project. It's not a defined start and stop. Your whistleblower hotline is not a project. It is a process. Analytics is also a business process. So you start with one risk the first year, maybe the second year, you add another ERP system and another ERP system the third year. And after about 4 to 5 years, you've got a pretty robust program. You're finally there. And that I think my take on the DOJ, although I'm not an attorney on this, but they expect progress. They don't expect you to have your entire company integrated and indexed day one. They just want to see continuous improvement that's risk-based. And I think it was clearly stated in the new guidance, actually, even in the old guidance, that's their expectations.
Vince, I typically end a podcast by asking the guest to look down the road 3 to 5 years, but I want to ask you instead, given the 2024 update, which was released this week, what would you suggest to the compliance professional, CCO, that they do maybe 2 or 3 things in the next 6 months to start to comply with this?
Yeah.
How would you help them get started?
I would suggest, obviously, read it, compare it to the 2023 version. Take note of the AI section in the risk assessment, because companies that are developing AI, if they have inherent bias or they harm the public in any way, DOJ is going to ask you, the compliance professional, where were you? Did you sign off on this? So you have liability there. But I would encourage you first to read it and compare it to last year. But second, go meet with your internal audit head and your finance leader, your CFO, and talk to them about how this aligns with their objectives and how you can work together. Because oftentimes they're the custodians of this type of data that you need. And you can say, look, I need, as a compliance professional, I need to demonstrate a data-driven compliance program that's improving over time, that doesn't just look at statistics on my data, but actually looks at the operations of the business. Can you help me get some vendor payment data or some customer sales data or et cetera? And we could do this together and work with them to get that data and to together help put a plan in place and do something. Because it's very clear, doing nothing is a very dangerous proposition and you will get laid out. I mean, DOJ makes it abundantly clear that analytics now is an expectation. Talk to your colleagues not outside of compliance, particularly internal audit, finance, or even the business operations, to, based on your risk assessment, give you the insight and the transactional data that you need to have transparency into whatever risks you're identifying. There's a lot of demos. There's a lot of analytics tools out there, and they are not expensive. That's the key. We're not talking millions of dollars. We're talking less than 100K to less than 200K, certainly well under 500K. The cost of 2 or 3 additional compliance professionals will help meet this expectations. You don't need a lot of people. Albemarle, which was one of our favorite clients, and we worked with them through their DOJ negotiations. They've been a customer for ours for a while now. They had, as Andrew McBride said, they had 1 or 2 people on the team. It doesn't take large groups of people to do a data-driven compliance program, and they got Compliance Program of the Year this year.
Vince, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you, if our listeners wanted to connect with you or find out more about Kona AI, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
I would certainly invite you to visit konaai.com, www.konai.com, KONAI.com. My head of business development is Patrick Grobel, P Grobel, GROBEL at GROBEL, or email me at vwalden@konaai.com. You can also, for those CFEs, if you're a fraud magazine, if you get fraud magazine in the mail from the ACFE, I write in every issue for the past, gosh, almost 7 years now. It's one of my creative outlets. My email address is there, but do please reach out. We love sharing our ideas and collaborating with companies. We'd love to show you our library of tests and what that looks like. So yeah, please, we would welcome in. We welcome a conversation.
Vince, I hope we can continue this discussion on the 2024 update to the evaluation of corporate compliance programs.
Thank you. And before we go, Tom, I said it wrong too. Just to be clear for Patrick's email, it's PGROBEL. I think I added an L on the end versus not. So P Global. Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate you having me on.